Transformative change is difficult, but it can also be a powerful catalyst for growth and innovation. My name is Michael Carter, and I am the President and Managing Partner of Level 5, and you are listening to the Opportunity Unleashed podcast. Each episode, I get to speak with an inspiring business leader who has successfully championed transformative change within their organization, and/or have had to navigate it within the market they play in. Regardless of the challenge, they have demonstrated incredible leadership throughout the journey. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Paul Jackson, COO of Gore Mutual Insurance Company, Canada's oldest insurer. It's mind-boggling for me to think that you've been selling insurance products for 200 years, and what you just shared with me, which is even more mind-boggling, is it's all been done organically. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Opportunity Unleashed.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited to spend the time with you. I don't know what you're going to ask me, so it's going to be a journey of discovery for me for sure, but great to be here.
You'll be great, I have no doubt. So first off, I think is for not everybody's familiar with what a mutual insurer is versus a regular insurer. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the differences and maybe a little bit about Gore and what makes Gore unique.
Yeah, sure. Topic close to my heart. So most insurers started out as mutuals. And what that means in effect is that the assets of the company are sort of owned by the policyholders. And, our company started in 1839, as you point out, almost 200 years ago. And it was built by a group of pioneers, really. These were people who had come to Canada, mainly from the UK, Scotland and Ireland. And, at that point, what is now Cambridge, the head office of our business, which has been the head office since 1839, that was sort of the Western frontier, if you like. Yeah. And these people were coming, not in the way that we do now by airplane, but, they'd made an arduous journey to get here to make a new life for themselves. And doing that at the Western frontier was fraught with risk. And one of the most significant risks that people were afraid of was fire. If you build a business, or if you're building farming or manufacturing, or you're building homes and communities, fire can just take you out. And so they came together to protect each other from the threat of fire. If one business burns to the ground, everybody else will support. And so mutual companies popped up all over Canada and the US during that time as communities, were emerging. And our company was actually started in Brantford, Ontario, moved very quickly to Galt, what is now Cambridge. And we've been in continuous operations ever since, which is really extraordinary.
It is.
No transaction to speak of, no M&A per se, but the business has just grown organically. One of the characteristics of a mutual company is that certainly in the Canadian market, it's difficult to bring in third-party capital from the outside to fuel your growth. And so, the balance sheet is everything. Protecting the balance sheet is the most important part of the role of management and the board. And so these companies tend to be quite conservative. You spend what you earn and you think about the very, very long term. And so, I think one of the characteristics of our business is that for decades and decades, the management and the board of the company have been looking into the long term, protecting the assets to ensure the sustainability of the company. So they're unique businesses. They're quite different from shareholder-driven organizations, where you're producing quarterly results and you're being held to account by your shareholders. We're certainly held to account, but on a much more long-term basis. And it's really about sort of steady, conservative, sustainable growth.
So you talked a little bit about how, by nature, mutuals are a little more conservative. You've done this in-house the whole almost 200 years. Wind the clock forward a little bit, because you've embarked on a journey recently that some would argue isn't so conservative, right? You've kind of taken this transformation journey to another level. You started it in 2019. It's pretty much going to affect every corner of the business. What was the impetus behind deciding to make that leap, if you will, into a transformation journey?
Yeah, 2019 was a really pivotal year for our organization. I think, one of the characteristics of the mutual companies that I sort of just explained is that, they're typically quite conservative and take a long-term view, but that can also breed a bit of apathy into the organization, a sort of a bit of an insular sense of our own sustainability. And the reality is that whether we like it or not, we're competing in a highly commercial market with scale players that are kept on their toes by their shareholders. And that creates an environment of innovation, growth and development. And you can't sort of choose not to participate in that. And we set about doing a piece of strategy work, which we called Project Next Horizon. And the horizon was actually 10 years. At the time, I was the chief distribution marketing officer, and I worked sort of, in lockstep with our CFO, Andy Taylor, and he and I led that piece of strategy work. And as it sort of unfolded over the course of the year, we realized there are a couple of directions we could take this work. We could sort of present a reasonably balanced view of where we sat in the broader market. Probably would have created a little bit of change here and there. Or we could really present a challenging and sort of transformative point of view of who we are and where we fit in a market that's changing rapidly. And when we looked out 10 years, what we realized is that the business that we had was likely not sustainable. And that's that's not an insignificant conclusion to reach.
It's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, I mean, halfway through the process, we sort of had a bit of a moment where we realized actually what we're getting into here is something really quite significant about the future of our 200-year-old company. And I look at it in two ways. There's sort of an inside view and an outside view. The inside view is, we concluded that we just didn't have the scale to compete. We were a regional company. We were about $400 million in premium, which in general insurance terms is not significant. And we were losing against the competition who were deploying scale benefits into the market. We were also seeing lots of consolidation going on. So, the big were getting bigger. The second piece is we lack diversification, really important in insurance when you're insuring properties particularly, which is a huge part of our business. You want to have that diversification. You want to be playing in different markets. We experience weather-related, big claims events. You'll realize one of those in one geography. You want to balance that in another one where you perhaps have a good year. So diversification is really important in insurance. And the third piece, which is really fundamental to our journey, is that we couldn't find meaningful ways to access third-party capital. So the size of our balance sheet was in effect what we had to play with. And that's an inherent constraint in a business like ours, and it's one that is really central to all of your decision making. So that was the inside stuff. Then we looked at the outside, and we saw consolidation of distribution, consolidation of insurers, lots of opportunity for taking cost out of those businesses, and attracting talent and doing really transformative stuff around data and analytics. Claims delivery, underwriting, the scale matters in general insurance or in almost every dimension. We also saw advancements in technology. We were on at the time multiple legacy IT systems in a small company. We were really, really constrained by ourselves. But we saw scale players going to sort of single unified platforms. I mean, it's totally game changing from a cost and scale standpoint. Customer expectations were changing.
Even at customer centricity, your ability to be more flexible and nimble in the marketplace to serve customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the time we had an offer which was pretty much limited to what it was because of our systems, our talent, our ability to invent and create, just limited by our size and our disproportionate complexity. We also saw much more of an onerous regulatory environment on the horizon that's actually coming to pass. So that's very difficult for smaller companies. You don't get a pass from the regulators because you're small. There's an expectation. There's a benchmark, and you have to hit it. So if it's tougher for you because you're a smaller company, it just makes it harder and more expensive. And then the last piece, which has really emerged in the last couple of years as a sort of an accelerating catalyst for us, is climate change, which is central to what we do in property and casualty insurance. So we're seeing now a much higher frequency of weather-related claims events, whether it's wind or fire or hail or rain, across the weather spectrum, it's happening much more frequently, and it's happening in a way which is creating really significant claims events for us, which changes the economics of our business. It makes reinsurance more expensive. It makes reinsurance a little more difficult to obtain for some of the smaller mutuals, for sure. And overall just increases the volatility and the cost of operating our business. So when you add all the internal stuff to the external stuff, it became really clear to us that we needed a major transformation of our organization across all dimensions. So, it wasn't just a new IT system, although that was central to what we did. It was also a new sort of vision for the future, a new culture, and certainly a new strategy, totally new operations. And so what we did in the first phase of our transformation between 2020 and 22 is we just built basically a completely new business on the platform that we had. So we do have now a single unified technology platform, which is completely game changing for our ability to scale efficiently. We had about 300 employees. We now have about 650 employees. Of the original 300, not actually that many left. I am one of them, so I'm almost 10 years in now. I'm definitely a legacy employee. There's a few of us, but a lot of new people, new talent have come from the outside, bringing new ideas and new ways of doing things that's completely sort of tipped our organization.
Because you need a mindset shift in an exercise like that, right? It's not the old way of doing things. It's not just the functional elements of your job, but it's how you approach your job, how you approach the company, what you buy into, right? So it does oftentimes take quite a bit of change in the body of the organization itself.
Yeah, and it was much needed for us. Like a lot of companies of our size, we had a lot of long-term employees and fantastic people who'd done a fantastic job. But this was a complete transformation of the business, and it needed sort of a real renewal of thinking, as you say. And for those of us,
I've talked about it before too. It's this notion of, because you've done so well for almost 200 years, right? And favorite quote, another colleague of mine is, success breeds complacency. You and I've talked about that statement before.
Yeah.
Here's a perfect example of that, where it's tough to get people out of their shell, outside of their comfort zone, to think differently.
Yeah, and honestly, that was a real challenge for people like me, people who were making the bridge out of the old company into the new one. I'd come into the office every day thinking, I've got to be a different leader. Mm-hmm. I've got to renew myself before I can even imagine renewing the organization. Yeah. And that's hard, because you change, and people see the change, and some people say, "Wow, I love how you're changing. You're saying the right stuff, and it's really inspiring, and I want to come with you." And honestly, other people don't like it, and they say, "I don't know what's happened to you."
Where's the old Paul?
Yeah, I used to like you.
What have you done with Paul?
Yeah. But that was critical to the success of the transformation. Because if we tried to put in a new IT system, but we basically all showed up as the same people as we were before, I mean, we weren't going to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so we knew this thing needed to be talent, technology, and operating model all at the same time. That led us to, we need people who can really think ambitiously and differently about where we take this business. And some people stayed with us and have been hugely successful, and I'm very, very proud of those people, actually. And a lot of people decided, this is not for me. I need to be somewhere else, and that's, again, totally fine. And I was, we actually celebrated a lot of people who left our business for the outstanding contribution that they'd made over the years. But, they said, this is not for me. And we said, okay, that sort of feels right. And so, they went off and did something else. And that made room for us to bring in, as I said, people who just brought a completely new point of view to the business.
So you really saw this, listening to you talk about it, and gives me some perspective. I mean, this was a must-have, not a nice-to-have. This wasn't something you kind of, maybe we should or maybe we shouldn't. You saw this as an opportunity to really future-proof the business in light of both internal and external dynamics that were going on.
Yeah, I mean, Andy and I felt it was a must-have. Right. And, we reached that conclusion, as I said, before we'd even finished the strategy work. Yeah. We knew what this was, and we knew that the threats to our business were existential. Mm-hmm. And, challenging part of that for us was to take that story to our board. Because, for years we'd been saying to our board, we're a good business and we do all right, and here's some good results, and everybody
And we
seems
can
happy.
keep doing that.
Yeah, and that was true. I mean, it was a good business, but it was a business that faced not just one, but a series of existential threats that we felt were going to take it out at some point. On the horizon. That's why we call the thing Next Horizon. And so that was a journey. I have to say, though, our board were magnificent throughout.
That's good.
Hugely supportive, very smart, really understood what we were saying, and not only supported us, but actually really drove the program.
That's great.
Knowing there was so much risk, and they knew that what we were saying is new company, so not iteration or like tweaking, but new company, and they fully supported that. And so far it's been really successful.
Good.
There are some challenges ahead for sure, but so far
as there is with any transformation, right? So
yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, talk to me about purpose. There's a lot of companies pay lip service to it. It's a hot topic. Very few companies in our experience genuinely embrace their purpose to help it, guide decision making, create the identity of the company, and so forth. It's one of the things I've always appreciated about Gore is you are one of those few companies that really embrace your purpose. And I'd just love to get a sense from you in terms of what, how does the purpose of the organization, insurance that does good, how does that manifest itself in the organization? And do you even have metrics that you measure against that? Because it is something that is very prominent, not just throughout the leadership team, but, in the organization itself. I'm curious to get your take on purpose.
Yeah, well, purpose is deeply embedded in who we are as an organization. Right back to the beginning of our conversation, actually, about, what's a mutual company.
Yeah.
By definition, it has to be a purpose-driven organization.
Fair.
One of our board members actually said to us during the initial stages of Next Horizon, if we're going to remain a mutual company, if we're not going to convert to a stock company, we're going to remain a mutual company, we were very clear that was our plan, then you have to define what's the point. It's a pretty cutting question.
Yeah.
What he's saying is, what's the point of the whole thing? And it really gets to it. We can come in and we can manufacture insurance products, and we can sell them through brokers, and we can play in the open market, and we can make a margin. But what's the point?
Why?
Because there's no shareholder return. So that was really sort of a probing question. And where we landed was with insurance that does good is that, if we're going to do this every day and we're going to make a margin, then what are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with the profits of the organization? And actually, when you get to it, it's pretty simple. It is the whole point of a mutual insurance company, is that you're creating value, and then you disperse that value back out to the communities in which you do business. But we needed to put a spin on that in a way that could connect with our stakeholders, our employees, our brokers, our customers, the communities in which we do business. And a lot of mutual companies grapple with, what does mutuality mean in the modern world? No one cares. You go out in the street and ask people, they're not. There's no awareness of what that means. But we got it to a place where we felt as if it started to really resonate, and we call our strategy, our Next Horizon strategy, purpose-driven, digitally led. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to get to there is the balance between being a purpose-driven organization that does good for the communities in which we do business, actively participates in doing good. But at the same time, the digitally led piece, what that talks to is, we have to have a high performance business that can compete in the open commercial market with the scale shareholder players. Because the two things sort of need to coexist. If we're not a high performance business, then we're not creating value. And then there's no value to then put back into the communities. And if we're a high performing business, but we're not purpose driven, then what are we doing creating value? Yeah. To what end? Why? Exactly. Yeah. So it's really sort of quite deeply intrinsic to who we are, this idea of purpose driven, digitally led. And we're now on a journey of really exploring what do we actually want to do with that value. And it's a work in progress. It's unfolding because it's
part of the transformation.
It is, yeah. And one thing you said earlier is right. If you scan the websites of all the biggest shareholder-driven insurance companies in the world, they're all purpose-driven. right? So
It's lip service.
but we get that. So the challenge for us, I think, as a mutual company, is how do we take a step up from that,
Yep.
so that we can say to our stakeholders, we truly are purpose driven. The entire point of us being here is to, create value that does good, and that bit isn't as easy actually.
Yeah, and you've heard us talk about it over the years. Probably, we have this view that brand is the value of a promise consistently kept, and so it's easy to make that promise. Like you said, I can check websites and they say wonderful things, but do you have the proof points that suggest not just to your customers but to the market and to your other stakeholders that you're actually delivering against that, and it's believable, which is hugely powerful and, quite frankly, a bigger driver of value creation.
Yeah, and one of the paradoxes of this, the challenges, is that sometimes the purpose-driven and digitally led, they compete with each other.
Yeah.
Because in my role as the chief operating officer, I'm often asked to make decisions in the business, and they're commercial decisions, and sometimes there is a trade-off from that decision, unfavorably to our purpose, but we check ourselves and we check each other on this. We're always
it's a litmus
saying,
test that you actually, which is fascinating because you do use it as a bit of a litmus test.
Yeah, we
you're
do.
making decisions, which is immensely powerful.
and sometimes we'll consciously make that trade-off,
Right.
Especially in areas like pricing,
Yep.
actuarial pricing, in risk selection. So we're not going to purposefully damage the economics of our business in favor of our purpose. But I do recognize that. That if you want to be truly purpose driven, then that is a tough one.
Yeah.
But the way insurance works is, you can find yourself in a really difficult spot if you make bad business decisions. And the way I look at it more holistically and long term is, I'd rather make some short-term business decisions in favor of the economics that might be unfavorable to the purpose for the long-term position that we need a sustainable, profitable business in order to actually have that impact. Yeah,
No, it makes sense. So you touched on this already. I'm going to call it, you're halfway through this exercise, this transformation. You mentioned earlier about having to even reinvent your own style a little bit as you've gone through here. What other lessons have you learned over the last few years having embarked on this journey? Is there anything else that you can think of that is, new to your kind of what you've learned versus what you knew going into it?
Yeah, it's been a real journey personally, actually. We often joke in the business that we've all given ourselves a sort of 5-year MBA here, doing this, because we've all been on a sort of vertical learning curve, and everything that's come at us, it's been the first time we've tackled it, and it's relentless. It just keeps coming. And we were lucky. We did bring in a whole bunch of consultants at the beginning of the process. We had all sorts of smart people in the business that helped to put some framework and some discipline and rigor around how we were tackling the early part of the transformation. We stood up a transformation office and reorganized ourselves a little bit, which was kind of scary. It's when you start changing the business like that, you realize, okay, well, we're doing this, it's real.
You're in the risk business and you're embarking on some pretty good risk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we were writing some pretty big checks as well. So you realize, okay, there's no turning back here. But I think, the way we tackled the transformation was in what we call S curves, because it's sort of like it represents a journey up a mountain. So 3 S curves. S1, which we called Be Brilliant, was really this hardcore transformation of our business talent, technology, operating model. And it was very disciplined and very process driven. So it was a real marathon to get through 2 to 3 years of the system, operating model, talent transformation, and it sort of suited my I suppose natural leadership style. I'm a bit of I thought I was a bit of a command and control sort of leader. This required a bit of command and control, we're not going to debate this. We're going to get on with it.
Yeah.
And the way we organized it was very tight at the top of the organization, and we drove the business down from the top. Very tight decision-making groups, a very high velocity. We do daily stand-ups. Things would get discussed, but for a very limited amount of time, decision. And it was also, I would say, a sort of programmatic approach to transformation. So, there wasn't a lot of need for debate about what we were going to do. We knew what we we're going to do. We just need to get on and do it, execute it really well. So that was S1, Be Brilliant. We're through that now. That build is done. The systems are in, the op model's in. And now we're into this S2 that we call Pivot to Performance. And the idea of that is, we built the platform, we built the core business, the platform. We spent a lot of money. We put about 10 years of our typical capital investment into 2 years.
Wow.
And we now have world-class technology. We have a totally scalable operating model and fantastic people all over the business. The challenge for us now is we got to make this thing work hard for us. It's still the operations are still too expensive. We haven't fully realized the benefits of the technology platform yet, and there's all sorts of places around the business where the work hasn't been finished or it hasn't yet started to deliver the value. And so, back to your question about what have I learned? We're about probably a year or so into this S2, and what I've realized is that it's messy. It's really messy. S1, very programmatic, top down, tight decision making, command and control. And I was really familiar with that, and I understood that. And I would go to work every day, and I knew exactly what my role was. Particularly in my, that was basically the essence of my role, was get it done. But this S2 is messy. There's no standard operating procedure.
There's no playbook.
There's no playbook.
Yeah.
The consultants are all gone. We're on our own, and we're trying to make this thing work. And the sort of the leadership journey that I've been on in the last sort of year or so has been to really step off the field and step up onto the balcony and try to coordinate a better approach to running the business and not instruct a better approach. So it's more coach rather than instructor. And I'm really trying to get to a place where we can empower the middle of our organization to really make the decisions that they know themselves. They have the expertise, they have the skill sets, the capabilities, they know what we need to do. Empower them, give them the space to really drive the business without someone like me issuing instructions all the time.
Yep.
And frankly, I also learned I don't have the answers to most of the problems.
Yeah.
Actually, what's needed from me is a tremendous amount of alignment, coordination, clarity, vision, coaching. But people don't need me to give them the answers. And frankly, that's good because I don't have the answers. So that's been a really fascinating journey for me to go on. And, honestly, it was scary because I know command and control. I don't know this. I don't even know what this is called. But it feels great for me personally. And we're starting to see the results come through. And different types of results, employee engagement survey, better results, turnover,
Because they
lower.
own it, right?
Yeah.
Now they get to own it.
Yeah, and people want to hear me say to them, you're a fantastic person. You know exactly what you're doing. Get on and do it. You know what needs to be done.
I trust you.
Get
I have
on
your
do it.
back.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not fully there yet as a leader, but it's really quite, liberating for me.
Good.
I also feel like I've learned a lot. But it's different from our first phase.
Yeah.
And it takes time to find your feet.
So phase 1 and 2, you know what you know now. If you could go back and wind the clock back 3 or 4 years when you were planning all this out, what advice would you give to yourself now that you know what you know?
Yeah, great question. The way insurance works is decisions you make this year, you typically see the consequences of those decisions in maybe 18 months to 2 years subsequent to that. And so I think maybe in the first S-curve, the Be Brilliant program, I think perhaps we were too short term in the way we were looking at things. So it really was a get it done job. And maybe we didn't look far enough out. And one of the tools that I'm bringing to the business this year is this concept of, we call it the ambidextrous organization, where you've got leaders who both sort of exploit the core capabilities of the business, who get the job done every day, produce the results, and also leaders who explore, where are we going next? What are the consequences? What does 2 years out look like? How do we prepare for that? Because it's coming.
Getting some time to think about the future as opposed to worry about today and tomorrow.
Yeah. And so I think the learning for me was that we spent almost all of our time on exploit and not enough on explore, even though we had a 10-year strategy, which we've been very sort of, I'd say, rigorous in following. But I think, we made some decisions in those first couple of years. We're now seeing the consequences of those, really around the performance of some parts of the business. Yeah. That had we made different decisions back then, we would be in maybe a better spot now. So I think the learning for me is, from a leadership standpoint, is, every day you come to work, you've got to be spending some time on exploit and some time on explore. You can't pick one or the other. If you're spending all of your time in explore, then you're not running a good business. Yeah, but I think the learning for me is, if you spend all of your time in exploit, then 2 years from now, which seems a long way away from now, it comes in the blink of an eye, and all of a sudden you're on the defense, or you're sort of picking up the pieces of decisions you made, years ago.
And I'd even say, listening to you speak, especially as the needs from leaders like you evolve, depending on where you are in those phases, you need to be thinking about what's needed of you in phase 2 and 3 while you're in phase 1, or else it catches up with you. Like I said, now you're it's not sequential. Yeah. It's something that needs to be balanced throughout the entire exercise, even though different phases may require different versions of you. Yeah. It's knowing when to turn those things on and off. And that's fascinating.
Well, and that you're onto something there. That comment around what's needed from you, that really resonates with me, because, again, part of my personal journey here is that, I have the same job title as I had at the beginning of this in 2020. But what I actually do in the organization is completely different. And, that's a little scary too, because when you're on a transformation journey like this, everybody likes to know, what's my job? What's my job going to be? What do I do? Yeah. People like it, sort of, bit of security around that. And I'm like everybody else. I like it. Sure. But what I've learned is that you have to let it unfold in front of you. Yeah. And, that really, it really scratches at your sort of your self-confidence and your self-assurance. What skills and expertise do you bring? How do you develop and grow as a leader? Because we're changing the organization today, right? Right now we're in a period of leadership change, which is involving me sort of relinquishing some of the stuff that I've been running for a while, moving into some different space. It's a little scary. Yeah. But again, I feel like this is the right thing for the organization, and so I ask myself, frequently, what am I good at? What am I passionate about? And what does the organization need from me? And I'm trying to find the sweet spot. And
the Venn diagram in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's 3 circles, and there's a spot right in the middle of that where you get the balance of, what skills do I bring that I know are value creating? What gets me up in the morning? Like, what's going to actually get me motivated? But also, what does the business need from me? And that changes. What the business needs from you changes. Yep. But having a level of consciousness on that, I think, is it's quite empowering, actually.
Yeah, I always find as leaders, you have to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And because things change all the time, and you need to be able to adapt and, number one, know yourself well, but also understand what the needs of you are from the external organization as well.
Yeah.
Paul, I want to thank you for taking the time today. I always enjoy spending time with you because I find your passion for your business is quite infectious and inspiring, and I love listening to not just your story about Gore, but your stories about yourself and your own journey that you've been on. So I always thought you'd be a great candidate for this podcast, and I think our listeners will enjoy it as well. But I just want to thank you again for taking the time, and I wish you continued success both with your own career, let alone Gore, and the journey that it's on. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate it. You've been listening to Opportunity Unleashed, a Level 5 podcast where I profile inspiring leaders who have successfully navigated transformative change in their careers and/or businesses. Our goal is to share great stories and hopefully leave you with a few pearls of wisdom that you can learn from. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to check back soon for our next interview.